Hi, I'm just doing the check over on your Polaris RZR 800S, and I'm just going to go through some of the items that you wanted checked over and the regular service list. So we're going to start here on the top, and I'm just going to talk about things that I found problems with. We're not going to touch on every single item that I checked over, because that'll be on the checklist when you get your estimate and your invoice. First, the coolant bottle was down right to the bottom. I filled that up. Your radiator was filled right to the top, so I didn't have to do anything with that. The radiator is decently clean. Hopefully you always remember that whenever you go for a ride and you know you get a bike, you get mud in your radiator, after it's cooled down, you spray that out with just a regular garden hose nozzle. Do not use high pressure on radiators because it bends the fins. We're going to go in here to your clutches and your rear yoke and your belt. So the belt, we were talking on the phone, and I said to go about you could go maybe another 25 hours with that belt and then recheck it. I'm still going to stick with that as long as you're not too hard on it. Next. So while I've been in here, I also checked, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to blow these clutches out with compressed air. Sorry about the little bit of grease. I've got to wipe that off. It was on my glove, and I got it off the yoke down there. Anyway, I checked your fly weights and your rollers and your spider, because I can compress that. I can compress that clutch down with a pry bar. The weights and the pins are getting wore out in the clutch. They're not completely wore out yet, but it's making it so the weights have movement this way. And what happens when they get enough movement is they start contacting the insides of the spider down in here where the weight is. It's like a big finger like this, and it flops up as it shifts, and it'll start wearing your spider out, and then your clutch is damaged, and then you're looking at new clutches and stuff like that. You don't want it to get that wore. I would recommend replacing those sometime in the near future. The rollers all seem to be okay. They all move freely, they spin, and I didn't feel any oblong, so sort of like bump, 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 like a hole that's roar like an egg, and it should be spinning round and it's sort of going up and down. They shouldn't be doing that because your clutch won't work properly. One-way bearing seems like it's good. There's no problem with that. It's I guess it's not a one-way bearing in this guy. Sorry about that. It's moving nice and free. There's no, it's not jammed up or anything like that. I wouldn't know if there was wear in your cover bushings or your sliding sheave bushing unless the clutch was assembled, so I can't really speculate on that part of it yet. But when you do the weights and the pins, you could do those at the same time. Have a look at them, disassemble the spider, and just make sure the clutch is all in good shape. Next, the reason that we came here in the first place is to show you the play you have in that yoke. So a little bit of play in those isn't so bad, but this one here, I starting to notice that if you watch the transmission shaft, so this is the transmission shaft in here at the tip of my index finger, it's not moving, and the yoke's moving a lot more than it is. So what happens is people don't grease these nipples in here enough, this Zerk fitting, and those splines in the yoke, they get wore out, and then eventually it just strips and it gives up, and you don't have any front wheel drive anymore. It's just two-wheel drive, and it makes a real loud grinding noise. The yoke replacement also requires replacement of this U-joint. So you would do those two at the same time. I think that's it for in here. I try to make information videos and not movies as best I can, but sometimes there's a few things that I have to go through. So here we have your lower control arm bushings and sleeves. So especially if you look at the far end, you can see it moving individual of the frame. It shouldn't be doing that. So those need to be replaced. Sometimes, just to warn you up front, sometimes, and I'll talk to you, I'm using this as an example for something in the back. When you get too sloppy, sort of getting like this, maybe this is just not quite as bad. We won't know until we take it apart, I guess. But sometimes what happens is you go beyond the bushings getting wore out, and you start having problems with the A-arm itself, the inside of the tube that the bushings and the sleeve go inside of. They're not snug anymore because the metal's actually been wore away from the A-arm, and then you have to either live with the play that's left when you replace the bushings and sleeves, or replace the A-arm itself. Also, I've seen on, especially on Polaris's, the holes that the bolts go through, they'll actually get oblonged, and I've seen times when people have had washers welded on to make it so that they didn't flop around so much anymore. Let's see. On the top, and this is the same on the other side for the top and bottom A-arms, you have play forward and backwards, which isn't a horrible thing. It does mess with your suspension and your steering just a little tiny bit. It's not really something you're going to notice driving on trails, but usually what I find happens is as the bushing outer surfaces get worn, or as the metal sleeve that runs inside the bushings that wraps around the bolts, so the bushing is, the sleeve is like a big long cylindrical tube. The bolt goes inside of it, and the sleeve goes inside the bushings, which are inside the air. Sorry about that. So what happens is just the ends of the metal bushings, as a bike gets more miles and years on it, they start wearing on the frame, on the A-arm side of it, and they wear little divots in it, and they make it so you have extra play when you put everything together, because you can't really, if you tighten the bolts down too much, you start bending the frame, the weldments on the frame, and you're not really supposed to do that. I have seen people put shims in on either side to try to take that up, but I don't know if that would be something that you'd want to do, or if you just go with it the way it is and we'll keep grease in it. Those bushings and sleeves and those ones are okay. I'd also mention to you your shock mounts, top and bottom on this side, and the top one on this side. Might be able to move that enough that you can see that it's kind of hidden in the shadow. There, you see the eyelet at the top of the shock. So that's the eyelet. This is the frame, and they shouldn't move independent of each other. And you can see that one, it is. And that's because those bushings and the eyelets are worn out, or worn. I will look and see if they're available aftermarket or through Polaris. Front diff fluid, that's where the fill and check plug is. Basically, you take the plug out, and the fluid should be full to the bottom of the threaded hole. You stick a little, I use a zip tie. You stick a zip tie in, take a little sample out. Fluids should normally come out relatively clean. It should not look like this. That is really dirty. So I also noticed on this side, we talked about this, is that we have staining on the differential case. You may have a seal leaking on your output here where your axle fits in. What we can do this time is we'll put new fluid in, and you go, I don't know, go 10 hours with the bike. Check it again. But make sure you're keeping an eye on that each time you go for a ride. If you see a whole bunch of fluid running everywhere, then you know you should stop and have it fixed. But if it stays the same, and when you check the fluid's not going down, and also it shouldn't be going up. So if you take the plug out and a whole bunch of water comes out, that's bad too. So I'll show you how to do that when you come. So for right now, what I suggest with that diff fluid, unless you just want to go ahead and change a seal without knowing 100%, change the fluid, and we'll check it, and you can check it again later, and just keep an eye on that. Both sides on the front end, you also need outer tie rod ends. They have tie in them. That's these guys in here. That's the same for this side. Let's see. I think that was it in the front. Well, we have some, this is the other thing that I noticed. So I mentioned to you on the phone, I think, your front U-joint, I see some play in it. Get my there we go. So you can see the play side to side, which is not abnormal. It's just not greased enough, possibly. It's just that I feel a little tiny amount of rotary play in the joint when I go in here and move it. But it might not be completely wore out. So what I'm going to suggest for this guy, if you want, is that we can just grease it and you don't have to change that joint. But the thing is that to be able to change the rear yoke, you have to take the prop shaft out anyway. So if you want to have this changed at the same time for peace of mind, I think it's, I don't know, half an hour, 15 minutes, something like that for labor, and the price of the U-joint. I can't remember what the U-joints cost right now, but anyway, it'll be on the estimate to do both U-joints, and you can decide if you want to only do the rear one and the rear yoke. Next, and just an FYI, the rear U-joint has to be, irregardless of whether or not it has any play or not, it has to be replaced to be able to replace that rear yoke, because you have to destroy it pretty much to take it out. Next, go to the back end, and we're going to start with the one that's most difficult for me to try to show you with one hand, but I'm going to try. So you're watching, this is your lower control arm mount, and you're going to watch and see for it having movement independent of the frame, and hopefully I can do it. You can see how that's moving a little bit. So you have play in the bushings and sleeves on your lower and your upper control arms, but they're not so bad that you couldn't go further. So these aren't as bad as what I saw, as I'm using as an example of bad up on the front lower one. So if you wanted to not do something right now and do it later, these would be the thing not to do right now. and we'll grease the heck out of them, make sure they have lots of grease in them, and you just do your regular service every I recommend at minimum 50 hours, but if you're going to come back and get your belt checked at 20 or 25 hours, then we can check these again at the same time and see how they're doing. What should be changed in the back end is you have a wheel bearing on this side. So that little bit of that movement that I'm, when I just press lightly with my hand, and that clicking sound is your wheel bearing on this side. And you can see that your CV joint that ends with your wheel bearing, you can see it moving independent of the bearing carrier, and it shouldn't. And the other movement that you have is, hopefully I can do this, is the bearing carrier moving independent of your upper and lower control arms, and that's because the bushings and the sleeves are wore out at these two, the top and bottom locations. And you have the same issue on that side for that. You also have a slight amount of movement in the wheel bearing on this side. So if you wanted to change both these rear ones at the same time and have them done, you can do that, or you can try and go a bit further with this one. I have no crystal balls. I don't know how long they'll go, so I can't tell you. I wish I could, but I can't. Next, you have very little play, a little tiny bit in your upper and lower control arms on this side and your bushings and sleeves. Not enough that, like on the other side, that I can even show you right here. So once again, we'll grease them, and that can go for a little while yet. You probably have more play in your end links. That's top and bottom, both sides, on both sides for your sway bar end links. So you can go longer with these. They're not going to fall apart as long as there's a bolt running through the eyelet. I guess eventually the center could give out, but what I would suggest is keep an eye on them and if you notice them getting a lot looser, then we can change them, because you don't really want it falling off on you. I don't know if I've ever seen one fall off, but what you will get from this is a rattle. So you'll hear noise from it when the suspension's working. So if that bugs you, then we can change them. I'll grease these bushings up here on your sway bar. I see in the notes from the other fellow that these were replaced before. So we'll make sure we get some grease in them. On this side, as I mentioned on the phone, you have an oil leak at your cylinder head. You can see where it's been seeping all the way around that gasket, or some portion of the gasket on the top of the engine. So I would recommend that at some point you have that repaired. Keep an eye on your oil level, and if you see it leaking much more than it is now, then I would have that cover removed and that fixed. Next, your air filter. This is the one we were talking about on the phone as well. You can see how dirty and that has gotten, and how it's compressing and the fins are sort of flopping. So sometimes you can take these and you can knock the dirt out of them when they get really dusty. And I can get a little bit of that out, but a lot of it's just staying in there. So I'd recommend changing that filter. I also noticed that the inside of your case is wet. I can tell it's wet because there's damp dirt stuck everywhere. So it's either oil or it's water, but I see a lot of it coming in that intake. So I'm just wondering if you're getting some water in somewhere. I'll have a look in your duct and up above and see if there's a spot where maybe something's been leaking, rain's leaking in. I don't know where you keep the bike parked, or maybe it's just because of that cover seal. So where did I put it? There it is. So with that cover seal broken the way it is, it's going to let dirt in. The other part I never even thought when we were talking on the phone is that cover is right by your rear wheel, and every time you go through a puddle, water splashes onto this. So maybe it's been leaking water in around that seal, and that's why the air filter is like it is, and such. Anyways, part of the service, I'll clean that air box out for you when we change the air filter. I think I've gotten through everything. I'm sorry it took so long. Just want to look at my list quick and make sure. And that's it. Sorry it took so long. I apologize. Anyway, I'll do an estimate up for you for most all the items on the list. I'll even put on for these, and I'll put in the notes what the time is for those, so you know what that's going to be in the future. And I'll also give you some idea of doing the work on your clutch for whenever you want to do that. Anyway, if you have any questions, please let me know.